So Canada just assembled a bipartisan CUSMA war room. Every sector at the table. Conservative heavyweights inside the structure. And Pierre Poilievre walked out and told cameras it proves Carney has no plan.
So the problem for Poilievre is that 3 of the people he just called failures are Erin O'Toole, Lisa Raitt, and Jean Charest.
His own party's former cabinet ministers and leadership, sitting inside Canada's negotiating coordination structure, while their current leader performs outrage on television. Washington doesn't need to divide Canada politically. Poilievre is doing it for free. Will this guy ever change?
Well, that's what we're covering today, Dave. Not the optics of it, not the politics of it, the strategic damage of it, and the clock that is now running. We also have the poll numbers, the American ambassador Pete Hoekstra's own contradictions, and a quiet signal on supply management that nobody is talking about. So let's get into all of this.
All right, let's start with the committee itself. And we'll begin with what Carney actually built, because calling this an advisory committee actually undersells it.
This is a structured intelligence operation chaired by Dominic LeBlanc. LeBlanc was chosen deliberately. He is one of the most experienced bilateral negotiators in the Canadian government.
The committee draws from banking, rail, mining, energy, manufacturing, dairy, forestry, and small business. It's not a collection of opinions. That's a map of every single sector where CUSMA terms directly affect Canadian pricing, supply chains, and jobs.
And here's the function that gets missed. Before you sit across from the American trade representative, you need to know where your domestic red lines are, which concessions cause permanent damage, which sectors can absorb pressure, and which ones collapse under it. You cannot walk into that room and improvise those answers.
No, and you absolutely cannot negotiate in public. Every time Poilievre demands that Carney announce the strategy in a press conference, he's asking Canada to hand Washington its counterpositions before the talks even formally begin.
The committee maps the battlefield. That's not a substitute for action. That is action. If you knew anything about negotiation, Pierre, you would already know this.
Yeah, Poilievre's attack isn't just wrong on the merits, it's actively useful to the American side of things. Trump's CUSMA strategy has one primary lever: exploit Canadian political division. If Carney is fighting 2 fronts simultaneously, Washington and his own opposition, he walks into negotiations already weakened.
And PP is delivering that division deliberately, as usual, calling the committee a failure, demanding public strategy announcements. Doing this knowing that O'Toole, Raitt, and Charest, the people who built the Conservative Party he now leads, are inside that room.
He's either performing outrage he knows is strategically dangerous, or he genuinely doesn't understand what changed between 2018 and now. Either way, the damage lands in the exact same place.
And here is what Canadians actually think about all of this, because the numbers published recently, well, they're striking.
Yeah, Mark Carney's approval rating sits at 62% according to the Liaison Strategies tracker published the other day. He is the only federal leader in Canada with a net positive rating. The Liberals are leading the Conservatives 45% to 33% nationally, which is a 12-point gap.
And on PP or Skippy, 60% of Canadians hold an unfavorable view of him right now. This is according to Angus Reid data published the other day, and his own base is fracturing. Last August, 18% of Conservative voters said they wanted a new leader. That number, well, it has now jumped to 30. So 3 in 10 of his own voters, which aren't that many, they want him gone.
Yeah, definitely. And combine that with the floor crossers, and you can see that whole structure of the Conservative Party is falling apart. Now remember, this is the person that's attacking Canada's negotiating architecture, a leader with 60% national unfavorability, losing caucus members to floor crossings, with a third of his own base questioning whether he should still be there. The Canadian public has made its calculation and said it loud and clear. Poilievre just refuses to see it or accept it.
Really, the only people that are supporting him are the manosphere guys, and we know what they're all like. So let's move on, okay? And let's talk about another real loser here in Canada, Pete Hoekstra, because of course he had to weigh in on this.
Definitely. The U.S. ambassador to Canada gave a 45-minute rambling interview to iPolitics that was released the other day. And he said something that generated headlines. Specifically, that there have been no substantive talks between Canada and the United States since October.
Which he then directly contradicted in the same interview by stating that negotiations between Canada and the U.S. are ongoing.
No substantive talks since October. Negotiations are ongoing. Both statements, same interview. This guy is a walking contradiction. And that is actually the Trump plan, to be deliberately ambiguous so that you keep Canada off balance. He's following that to the letter.
But they can't keep up with the lies anymore. I think that's the biggest problem.
True.
Now, there is one genuinely constructive signal buried in Hoekstra's communications this week. PEI Premier Rob Lance confirmed publicly that Hoekstra told him privately that supply management is not going to be up for any substantial change in the CUSMA review.
Yeah, supply management, Canada's protection system for dairy and poultry. It has been a flashpoint in every trade negotiation for 30 years. If Washington has privately signals it's off the table before formal talks even begin, well, that removes one of the highest pressure leverage points they've historically used against Canadian agriculture.
But here's the operational pressure that makes all of this urgent and why this committee is needed so badly. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, well, remember he stated publicly that Canada is behind Mexico in the CUSMA talks? We are behind on the actual negotiating timeline. Mexico, they have a formal bilateral round with the United States scheduled for the week of May 25th.
Mexico is negotiating a bilateral position alone. So if Mexico locks in terms that disadvantage Canada within the trilateral structure, Canada inherits those terms from a weakened starting point. That's just how it works.
And the U.S., it has every incentive to close with Mexico first and then present Canada with a framework already half constructed, because then they can tell Ottawa to sign on or exit CUSMA entirely. So May 25th is a hard operational deadline, and the committee's work needs to accelerate, not get bogged down in political sideshows by PP. So that is why Carney has this committee getting underway on Monday.
Now, let's be direct about what this committee means politically for Carney and for Canada beyond the negotiating table. When O'Toole and Raitt and Charest are inside that structure, any deal that Carney reaches is significantly harder to attack as just a liberal deal. It becomes a Canadian deal. That distinction matters a lot, domestically and internationally.
Yes, because Carney walks into CUSMA talks not just as a liberal prime minister with a majority government, but as the leader of a coordinated national position that includes his opponents. Washington cannot frame him as a partisan negotiator without domestic consensus. That framing, a recurring American tactic, by the way, is neutralized before it can be deployed.
And if the deal is defensible, the bipartisan stamp makes it durable. It doesn't get unwound when the government changes. And that's the long game here. And Prime Minister Carney clearly understands that.
And PP does not. Imagine how much more we'd like him if he actually worked with our Prime Minister. There's also the political capital dimension. If Canada enters coordinated and exits with a defensible outcome, the committee structure becomes proof of governing competence, a template, something that gets cited in the next crisis.
And if it goes wrong, well, Mark Carney has shared accountability with the broadest possible coalition of Canadian industry and political leadership. There are two trajectories from here. In the first, the committee functions as built. Industry and bipartisan voices give Carney a unified mandate. Canada enters coordinated, and Washington can't find the political opening it's actually looking for.
In the second, Poilievre's attacks succeed. The bipartisan cover fractures, and Canada walks in divided. Then the USA uses that division exactly the way it uses it every time it has, and they leverage that advantage. And I think Poilievre is counting on those 40 million bot and AI accounts that are spreading propaganda lies all around the Canadian internet right now. And it's not going to work on Canadians. We're too smart for that.
Yes, we are. A Canada that walks in coordinated, bipartisan, and prepared tells Washington something it will never forget. A Canada that walked in divided tells Washington something it will test again and again, day after day.
So here's what we're putting to you.
Does Prime Minister Carney have enough runway to close the internal coordination gap before Washington forces the first formal position? Is Hoekstra's supply management signal actually genuine, or is it one more piece of strategic confusion designed to keep Canada guessing?
And the question that's going to generate the most debate in this comment section is Poilievre's attack on his committee calculated politics, or has he genuinely miscalculated how much damage it does to Canada's position? Drop your thoughts below, because this community is consistently ahead of the mainstream coverage on this, and we read every one of your comments.
And if this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually moving inside the talks, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, because this timeline is accelerating super fast, and we're on it every day, and we'll keep covering it.
We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Ciao for now.